Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1291st New Social Environment. I'm Magley, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Paul Preciado, Sophie Lewis, Pamela Sneed, Ariana Reines, and Ksenia M. Soboleva. Paul Preciado is a writer, curator, filmmaker, and one of the leading thinkers in the study of gender and sexual politics. His books including Manifesto Contra-sexual, Testo Junkie, Sex, Drugs, and Biopolitics, Pornotopia, Can the Monster Speak? An Apartment on Uranus, and Dysphoria Mundi, as well as his film Orlando, My Political Biography, have become a reference for contemporary queer, transfeminist, and non-binary countercultures. Pamela Sneed is a New York-based poet, writer, performer, and visual artist, author of Funeral Diva, as well as Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery, Kong and Other Works, Sweet Dreams and Two Chaplets, Gift by Belladonna, and Black Panther. She has been featured in the New York Times Magazine, the New Yorker, Art Forum, Hyperallergic, and on the cover of New York Magazine. She is online faculty at SAIC's Low Res MFA and has also been a visiting artist at SAIC in the program for 4 years. Ariana Reines is a poet, Obie-winning playwright, performing artist, and translator. Her newest books are Wave of Blood and The Rose. A Sandbook won the Kingsley Tufts Prize in 2020 and was longlisted for the National Book Award. She has created performances for Le Mouvement Biel, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Guggenheim Museum, Performance Space New York, and many others. And our host today, Dr. Ksenia M. Soboleva, is a New York-based writer and art historian specializing in queer art and culture. She holds a PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts, NYU. Her writings have appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, Balm, Ursula Magazine, and others. Soboleva practices an biographical approach to art history and an historical approach to autobiography. She is currently completing her book manuscript, What Happens After Art, AIDS, and Lesbian Histories. Soboleva teaches at NYU. And with that, I will hand it over to Ksenia to get us started.
Thank you so much, Magley, and thank you to Chloe, and thank you to everyone at the Book on Rail for making this possible. And also, of course, thank you to Winter Editions for republishing these two fantastic books. And thank you to the panelists for joining me today. Unfortunately, Sophie Lewis can't join, but we will hopefully we'll do we'll do um we'll do her writing. We'll honor her writing in her absence. And I received several messages from people about how hot today's lineup is, and somebody referenced to it as the Super Bowl, and I couldn't agree more. And I'm truly so delighted to moderate this dialogue between your brilliant minds. And Wittig is a thinker who has meant a great deal to me, and my research on how lesbian identity has always held an expansive queerness, and has always come in many genders. And I remember reading that, the famous phrase, lesbians are not women, and just being completely mind blown that here was someone detaching lesbian identity from the construct of gender itself, right? And but when I was a student, when I was a young graduate student, Wittig was not a cool thing to read. No one was assigning Wittig. I don't remember ever attending a lecture where she was referenced in any meaningful way. Also, I have to say I was in art history and not in gender studies, though the discourse of gender studies was far more compelling to me than art history, and I tried to follow the discourse as best as I could, but I was also, you know, classic PhD student insecurity, and I thought I'm probably missing something here, and I sort of filed her away for a while. And then I remember more towards the end of my PhD, I was on YouTube and I was watching different lectures of queer thinkers, and I didn't actually know what Wittig looked like. I had never seen a photograph of her. And, you know, it's interesting because someone like Jill Johnston, who was her contemporary, was, you know, she appeared on her own covers, and she was deeply invested in her public presentation. And I said this to the panelists, but I happen to own my French version of the lesbian body is one that was owned by Jill Johnston. And but Wittig was not, or Paul, when reading your work, right? You're on your cover. It's almost impossible to not know what you look like. But Wittig was not that. And so I didn't know what she looked like. And in my head, I had imagined someone like Simone de Beauvoir, right? Someone that had long hair pulled back, that wore jewelry, that was, you know, culturally coded as a woman, because I had become convinced that if you you know, if you write like Wittig, that's what you look like, which of course was misguided. And so then I was on YouTube, and I found there was a video, and it was titled something like Monique Wittig reads from The Straight Mind, and it was a panel of people, and the quality of the video was terrible, and I couldn't figure out which one was her. And I thought, well, she's definitely not the guy on the panel. Which one is she? And then I realized she's the guy on the panel. Her androgyny, her butchness, it was at that time unexpected to me. Though if I had trusted my own insights, it shouldn't have been. But and I didn't know at that point that, you know, among friends she went by Theo. And so you know, I had become misguided to think that surely if you write about your clit and your labia with such commitment, you must present it a certain way. And so somehow seeing her seeing her speak, seeing her on that panel, it gave me permission to reinvest in her, because it showed that you know, that she was someone who was insisting on lesbian identity without a commitment to any perceived notion of womanhood as a cultural construct. And of course, that's not to say that one's appearance must correspond with one's idea, but in that moment and in that case, that was a really profound discovery for me. And so that was my introduction to Wittig, and I'd love to open it up and hear from all of you how you first came to her writing, and what she has meant to you throughout your careers. Paul, perhaps we can start with you. You wrote a beautiful introduction for The Lesbian Body.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here, part of this panel. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Ksenia, for the intro and the presentation. Um, I'm, you know, even like writing that introduction for The Lesbian Body, for me, uh, maybe it was one of the best things that happened to me in my life. I have to say, I could have not imagined, like, basically when I first encountered that book when I was 17 years old, and that book became for me, um, became like a really like a life savior, something that fully and completely changed my life, transformed my life. It was like a door to many other books. It's like the door to the library of my life. And then when, um, when the editing house and Sandy, Monique Wittig's widow, actually contacted me to say, "Do you want to write the intro for the lesbian body?" For me, I was like, "Oh my God!" I didn't even think that I was that I was at the that I could do something like that. And I thought for a while, I might not be the right person to do this because of basically like I'm a trans person now. And even though, we can discuss these questions, but then I thought this might be like for many people might seem like a kind of a betrayal of some kind of basically what the lesbian body means for a lot of people, that it would be me that would be doing the introduction. But at the same time, I thought it was an honor, and I actually said it in the intro. For me, the lesbian body is not it is not tied, absolutely not to womanhood, absolutely not either to a kind of biologically defined identity or a female identity as has been defined within patriarchal society or within the heterosexual regime, if we want to speak like Monique Wittig. But so I could very easily say that even being trans, I am and I have a lesbian body, right? That for me, that is not a contradiction, even though I know that this can be like it's a reign of this endless discussions, right? So yeah, it was really a privilege for me to be able to do this introduction. And I actually found the book. I think that many of us actually found this book by chance. I think the book was meant to come to us at some point, because honestly, I found this book I have like the old edition that I speak about in the intro, this Spanish edition that I found in 1987 in a kind of an old second-hand bookstore. And I entered, and suddenly I saw this book, and I was like, my God, this book is really speaking to me. I bought it, and I was like running away for people not to see me with this book in my hands, because basically at that time I didn't even know what it was to be a lesbian. I didn't know any lesbian. I was like 17 years old, and I had just arrived to Madrid to study philosophy. So and then the book, I have to say that almost I read this book almost, this is going to look like an exaggeration, but it's true. I read it like every 2 years or something like that. And every time is fully different, because of course the book was not the same when I read it when I was 17 years old, and I didn't know anything about like lesbian culture. And of course, if you don't know anything about lesbian culture and you happen to find this book, the surprise can be enormous, right? Because if you really look into and trying to understand what the lesbian body might be and what the lesbian culture might be, and then you happen to find like this kind of strange poetry. We can speak about it like very very sexual, but at the same time very violent book, and absolutely against the grain of what was a book supposed to be, even in literature at that time. I was like, the surprise was so enormous that actually then like following this book, I was like trying to understand what this book was that I couldn't understand, that I started like asking people, do you know this book? What do you think about this book? And then from knowing this book, I went into Les Guerrières. I went into, of course, like many other books, Nicole, maybe references that are more from the French context that you might not know, because some of the contemporaries from Wittig from the early 70s, when the book was written, are less known than Wittig in the US. So like Nicole Clos-Mathieu, Colette Guillaumin, like all these Marsex feminists of the time, they were extremely radical, and that look, most of them like were they really like male looking butches, but they were like highly like critical of patriarchal discourses and highly critical of men as well. So if you see them and you saw them at that time, it was like very strange to really like get to understand what this was about, because in a sense, trans culture as we know it now didn't really exist. So I wonder like what would have happened to many of these like in between characters of that time, if we were like in the early 2000s, and I don't know, testosterone would be like available, and like other technologies, and just like even language would be different, right? So yes, I found this book, and then I actually I went to the US. I studied gender theory, philosophy, whatever. And I was obsessed with Monique Wittig in a time that no one really, at that time for sure, no one really was speaking about Monique Wittig, because even Butler had not yet like written, The Park of Gender Trouble on Wittig. And I was so obsessed that I actually came back to France looking for Wittig, thinking that she was here. And then I found a really good friend of Wittig, Suzette Robichon, who's like still alive and is a major like activist in contemporary culture today in France. She's amazing. And Wittig, and Suzette told me that Wittig was teaching in the US. So I was like, what? How is this possible? How could it be that this woman is like teaching in the middle of the desert, like somewhere in the US, and no one knows? And until the day I finally met BT, and that was like, that was fantastic, and it kind of in a way also changed my life, and the way I write, the way I relate to even to philosophy as a kind of a fiction writing uh, endeavor or something like that. That's the way I see philosophy, as something that for sure is connected to Wittig's writing, right? So yeah, I could like tell many other things, but I think that that's more than enough for the intro about how I met this book and what it meant to be for me. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ariana, maybe we can go over to you.
Hi. Hey everybody. So I found Wittig by accident. I found a copy of Les Guerrières, like it was either in a box like th of thrown away books on the sidewalk, or it was being sold on the sidewalk. I can't remember, but there was like something about it. And I started reading it while I was doing this performance from my first play, and I remember like I was like overwhelmed and like I hadn't been so excited by anything. I was like, is this poetry? Like, what is this? Those of you who are familiar with Les Guerrières, it's like it has this, there's a lot of like all caps incantations of names, and it has this yeah, incantatory power. It's like extremely exciting. I think I was depressed at the time, and my depression went away when I read this book. And I was just kind of baffled that I was even invited to be part of this panel because I've never spoken publicly about Wittig, but the week that I was reading it, I happened to be in a dressing room with Chris Kraus, and I was like, Chris, have you ever read this? Like, what the fuck? Like, why didn't anybody ever tell me about this? Like, why didn't I know about this? And I'm just going to say, there's a lot more that I could say, but I would just like to leave this in this space. Maybe we can talk about it in the Q&A, but like, why wasn't this being read? What happened? Like, who's stabbing who in the back? Whatever that is, could we stop doing that? Because it holds the culture back. Like it's just I don't know why like there was this aura of like out of fashion, like not good, whatever, but my specialty is finding things in the garbage, so it's what I do for a living. Anyway, thank you. Happy to be here.
We share that. We share that. We can talk about that more. Thank you so much. Pamela, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. I mean, I feel like I'm not an expert on Wittig's work. I encountered their work like a really long time ago. I have no idea. I will say maybe they're an angel in my life. And basically, I wrote about my first book was Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery. And yeah, and I was 27 years old, and I won't tell you how old I am now, but basically, I came across a quote by Wittig that I used to sort of preface the book, and I was saying this to a student recently, which is remember that time that you were not a slave. Try to remember. Failing that, invent. And that was just like really powerful to me. And I've written about slavery all my life. And I think I sort of like pioneered in certain ways, and I was also saying to a student recently that, I'm really glad to see like the plethora of scholars now looking at slavery, but for a long time it wasn't really looked at. And so in that regard, I think Wittig like sort of like pioneered and gave me language as a young queer person. So.
Thank you, Pamela. And indeed, you have the Wittig quote here in your book. And so many of you are bringing up this fact that she was out of fashion, and I feel, and she certainly was out of fashion when I was a student, but I feel that she is coming back into fashion, which of course is demonstrated by the republication of these two books. I was at the Lesbian Lives Conference recently, and there was a whole panel on Wittig, and I see young scholars turning to Wittig. Even my undergrads, whenever I offhandedly quote, lesbians are not women, they immediately take out their pens and they're like, will you repeat that? Because they want to capture it. And many of them will have already read Judith Butler, but I find that just Wittig's very declarative formulation of detaching sexual identity from gender, lesbians are not women, resonates more immediately with them. They can really grasp it, and then I follow up with, lesbians are not women, lesbian comes in many genders, and it opens up this very exciting possibility for an identity that they thought was collecting dust. And it's too bad that Sophie isn't here, because in her introduction of Across the Akron, which is also now published, one just fell, which is also published now on eFlux, so everyone can read it. She writes about how there are so many transphobic thinkers that have also been returning to Wittig and have been using her to support their, she says, fascistic cis-sexism. And that includes Marguerite Stern and Dora Muto in France. And, after reading Sophie's essay, I was curious, so I got on YouTube again. And I watched an interview with Dora Muto. I hadn't actually really heard of her. And I expected, I don't know what I expected, but I just expected a more articulate person who could package their hatred in a seductive way, because I knew that she has so many followers. Like, surely there must be a reason. Like, she must be really, really good at her transphobic messages. And then I watched the video, and she's not articulate at all. She's basically saying everyone has lost their minds, that they, clearly this woman is a man and he's pretending to be a woman. And, at one point she's talking about Paul, and it's so clear how she's making a real effort to use the wrong pronoun, what she considers the correct pronoun, and then once or twice she slips and she does say he, and then she needs to correct herself. And then there's always this argument that always comes up, that's something along the lines of, it's these days, if you feel like a woman, you are a woman, and it's like a horse wanting to be a turtle and saying that it's a turtle. And I'm like, how amazing would it be if horses could tell us that they were turtles, and or any variety of animals, and how incredible would it be to have that sort of interspecies communication, and to allow for that animal agency, that horses could be turtles. And how is it that this argument is presented as the apocalyptic vision of the world, when there is literally a genocide happening in Palestine, abortion is being outlawed, and across the globe, governments are becoming increasingly right-wing? And so I just, I guess my question is, how do we balance as scholars who are invested in the gender expansiveness of Wittig's writing, how do we balance that and the promise of her writing with transphobic views? And yeah.
Ksenia, I just like to say something very briefly because I
Please.
feel I'm pissed. I have to say I'm pissed because basically these two women that are mentioned in Sophie's article, they are meaningless. You know, we shouldn't even be speaking about that. They are really like they don't mean anything. They have no knowledge of Wittig's work at all, and they claim that they claim that they basically they reference whatever they reference. Simone de Beauvoir, they reference Wittig, and they can reference anyone. And I honestly, I find insulting that we even paying attention to that, even to their arguments, or even that we, and I'm sorry to say that Ksenia, but for me, I feel disrespected, even that you take their arguments about the animals, like the horse, whatever, to refer to speak again about trans people, because we trans people, we can't take it anymore. It's like every debate has to be about us. Every debate has to be about our bodies, what we do, if we have to the right to do it, this comparison, the comparisons with animals and whatever. I'm like fed up to here with this issue. And I think that we need to speak about Monique Wittig. And I'm sorry that Sophie referenced that in the article. It's a really like meaningless reference that has nothing to do. And mostly there are very few people, to tell you the truth, there are very few transphobic people that are using Monique Wittig seriously, because Monique Wittig's work is fully about denaturalizing gender. So it's very difficult to use her work. There is nothing that would underline the biological body, or even issues that have to do with maternity, because Monique Wittig is hugely critical of the issue of like equating the female body with maternity, as Sophie could have explained if she were here. So I honestly, but I think for me, this is a question about how we have the debates and we frame the debates that we're having now, because it's like almost I see like the obsession of fascism with the trans body, and the way we speak about the trans body is coming everywhere, and we need to put it aside. We need to put it aside because it's not possible. It's like otherwise the violence is repeated every time in every debate that we have. So this is the only thing that I would say, and I'm sorry to say it, but I honestly, you cannot imagine the amount of discursive violence that we are going through these days. So and I know that the intention was not that, but I need to say it.
No, thank you, Paul. That's so valuable. Yeah, of course, Ariana.
I want to add something. I just want to say a word about literary merit, which may seem like a very stodgy thing to say, but Wittig is a tremendous writer and a tremendous thinker. And the lesbian body is an alarming feat of the imagination. It's a titanic, gigantic, massively important literary work. And that is true that is true irregardless of from whatever perspective you may be coming to their work. It doesn't matter. You have to the reason why we're talking about Wittig is because of the colossal literary merit of the writing. And I do think that this is a useful framing structure when we are marking out the perimeter of how to talk about identity and being in a highly contested and violent time. We're talking about Wittig because of the merit of the work. And when you experience it and you're plunged into it, you're forced to deal with an extraordinary act, an extraordinary feat of the imagination, of creation. It's a great work of erotic poetry, for which there is a long and deep tradition that transcends time, gender, culture, and certainly transcends, the rise and fall of all of the fascisms that this planet has ever seen. So I just, that's why these small minds don't don't belong. Like, you know, anybody on the internet can reference anything, but that doesn't mean that they have the kind of mind that can contend with this material. So I'm sorry to be a snob, but you know, sometimes it's helpful.
Pamela?
Um, I don't have anything to say. I'm just listening. Um, yeah, the only thing that I want to assert is also the war on Black women's bodies, you know. And I feel like that needs to be foremost too, and that, you know, he gave me language in that way. So in a way transcending, you know, sort of like race. But anyway, in all these discussions, I feel like Black women are invisible. And so I kind of wanted to just state that.
Thank you. And for you all returning to these two books today, were there things that newly resonated, or that were felt differently revisiting them today, from when you read them the first time?
It was better than I even remembered.
And do you want to say why, Ariana?
I mean, okay. So, well, we'll hear a little bit from the lesbian body, but I was like, we have seen so much dismemberment. This is a book of dismemberment that also reconstitutes and rebuilds and restores the body. And I I think that it creates a kind of it operates a kind of sacred erotics that's very unusual. But maybe we could trace it to Sod, or I don't know. I don't want to reference anything except for what Wittig references, like the Song of Songs, or the myth of Isis and Osiris, or Greek myth, etc. Like, I there's like a tradition in French writing of these like excessively violent texts that we have from the 20th century. I don't know, Guillotin, for example, like like there's a deep tradition, I think, in queer writing. I think of Dennis Cooper, where dismemberment is also somehow deeply tender, or a kind of frailty, fragility, tenderness, intimacy is arrived at through like ultra violence and extremity, extreme sex, extreme dismemberment. And I was like wondering if what amazed me is that I kept on turning the pages, that the imagination and the pacing and the kind of cinematic structure of this book would keep me going. And it also amazed me that the violence of the book, and it's often talking to the second person, to the you, which is you the reader. It amazed me that that violence didn't stop me from reading, because we've witnessed such horrific violence, especially in the last 2 years, on a level that is, I think, transformed the psyche of the collective in ways that we have yet to be able to grapple with. And I was like, how is it that I'm invigorated by this violent text or this violent imaginary when I'm so exhausted by literal dismemberment? Does that make sense? And so what it taught me, or what I think I'm learning from it, is that a literary act, a literary violent act, or a violent act in language, that has this aim of somehow encompassing the destruction and the reconstitution of being or something, that it can actually be quite restoring, and invigorating, without being the kind of force, now I'm quoting Simone Weil, the kind of force that turns you to stone. It's not a petrifying or an ossifying kind of violence that is happening in this book. It's kind of like an orgiastic, cellular frenzy, and for whatever reason, it feels good to me.
Paul,
Wow.
yeah, did you want to add something, or Pamela?
No, I was just kind of like looking over the introduction. And I think this is Paul's introduction, but something that stood out to me was gender abolitionism as a phrase, and I thought that that was just like brilliant. Um, and that's part of like Wittig's theory. And then the struggle of women as a class to end women as a class. And I thought that that was also brilliant. So
Yeah,
these are a couple of things that I just sort of underlined that I thought were pretty amazing. Um,
that Sophie said.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I do. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I also resonating on some of the things that you've been saying that I was I really agree with both Pamela and Ariana. Um, One for me, what I saw it because rereading the book for writing the intro was a little bit different than just rereading the book because then I had to make many choices of okay, what am I going to say about the book? They're like, this is my subjective reading, but it's maybe also like a kind of both in terms of literary canon, as Ariana was saying, this book is so massive that maybe if some, like if out of the 20th century we will have to get one single book of lesbian literature, maybe this would be one of the books, right? So this is really like a milestone. So it was very, very difficult for me to make decisions of what to say about the book. But then and also I was like rereading the violent tone of the book and how this was received by critics at the time, because this comes back to the question of what happened to Monique Wittig and why she was forgotten, right? Because basically she started in France like basically very early in 1964 as a kind of a brilliant literary figure, right? Like she wrote the Apartement. It was like fantastic. Everyone was like, wow, this is the nouveau roman, new figure and whatever, right? And then after that, she went into politics. She completely gave herself or themselves to the political struggles of the time, and including like workers' struggles, but also anti-colonial struggles of the time, and then feminism. And then she actually, with other people, she understood that feminism was fully excluding not just like, of course, like migrant, especially Algerian women at that time, but also lesbians, right? And that was also the case also for the homosexual movement, the Front Homosexuel de Libération Révolutionnaire at that time. So basically, when she came back to literature, she was like politically ignite. She was like on fire politically. And then, so there is a radical difference between what she was doing in 1964 and what the lesbian body is. Like, no one in France expected Monique Wittig to suddenly come up with a book that is called, can you imagine something like that? I mean, she got like a major prize for the Opoponats. Then she's coming back and she's presenting this, the lesbian body, right? And then, of course, like critics start reading and they see this, I mean, absolutely violent, apparently violent text, very, I mean, literally brilliant, but it's still like very difficult to classify. Is this poetry? Is not a novel for sure? What is this? Is this an invocation? Is this a prayer from the beginning to the end? What is that, right? So the book had like the most horrible criticism that you can imagine. Like basically after that book, Monique Wittig was basically relegated to saying, okay, this is just not just a radical writer, but she's also like, she's really writing about vaginas, violent dismembering of the body, and she's calling this the lesbian body. So what is this, right? So for the literary world in France, she's gone. That's it. That's the end. And then at the same time, she's starting to say very critically that the body that is being placed at the core, at the center of the political movement of feminism is not shouldn't be a female body. That is something else, right? So it's basically taking away the very core of identity politics of feminism. And then, of course, what is going to happen is that she will be also rejected fully by the feminist movement in France, right? So by the end of the 90s, of the 70s, sorry, she's actually going to the US and almost disappearing, becoming imperceptible, becoming invisible, fully invisible, right? So, and it's going to take really, really long time. And maybe it's only now that Monique Wittig can really be read, right? That's why it's so beautiful, I guess, that all of us are here from different generations, like speaking about them. And then the book for me, when I read it again, like for the introduction, I thought something like that I had not seen before, which was what does it mean to love a body that has been destroyed by necropolitical violence? What does it mean? And this for me is the core, now for me is the core question of the book, is that, and this applies as well to bodies that had gone through racial oppression, slavery, genocide, all kinds of different violence, right? So in a sense, this is a body that is fragmented. It's a body that is destroyed. It's a body in pieces. It's a body that is missing organs that will never be complete. And for me, this was the most beautiful part of, for me, like rereading the book. Because that I didn't see it before. Before, for me, it was like, this was like, as a little bit like as Ariana was saying, it was like more like a kind of a lesbian sadist orgy or something like that. And now I don't see it this way anymore. Now I see it much more in a much more like, almost like as if literature could be a performative ritual to reconstruct the body of the lover, right? After this body has been fully destroyed and dismembered by patriarchal gaze, by necropolitical violence, by capitalism, by class struggles, by slavery. So how to love in those conditions? And of course, to love is basically to just have like a bunch of ruins and fragmented pieces, right? And still like work with them up to the point that they become a lesbian body, the lesbian body, which is not absolutely, has nothing to do with two women having sex together. Absolutely not. This is a collective adventure, right? So that for me remains now as something that maybe also because of, as Ariana was saying before, like the last years have been like so difficult. And so, I mean, we've seen so much violence all around, but it's just because we are like, let's say like the Western world, right? Because I mean, our other people in other contexts have been like going through a lot of violence for really, really, really long time. And even like racial minorities in like the Western context have been going through an enormous amount of violence, right? So for me, this relationship between love and violence and this tension is at the core of the book now, as I see it.
Beautiful, thank you. Ariana or Pamela, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I just thought it was interesting, like just thinking about what caused them to leave France, right? And it was sort of like all these being within the, I don't even know what term to use within the women's communities. And so I think that that's like really interesting too, about like how we sort of, you know, I don't know, battle each other.
Yeah. I agree. Yes. Even, I mean, even the Mouvement de Libération des Femmes, the MLF, which basically was founded by 5 different people, including Wittig, that actually did like a kind of a ritual in the early 70s. Even that movement was at the end captured by straight white women and spelling any other type of identity on belonging, right? Like so it became, I think this is very interesting for us to reflect upon, basically, like how, which is even when we do the history of feminism, what does it mean? Can we still do this history the same way that we've been doing it until now? And I think that in that respect, Pitik is an extraordinary uh, kind of a vantage point to be able to look at history, at what is happening, right? But I think that, for instance, that is very clear also in Pamela's work. I mean, that almost your work, I think that in that sense, you're a little bit like Pitik, that your work allows to build a completely different cartography of feminism, a different history of feminism, right? So those figures, a little bit, it could be the same, for instance, if we think about lesbian Feinberg, or, like kind of a outside limit figures, inside figures that allows us to rebuild fully like a different cartography of feminism, and most of the main histories of feminism that we've been telling to each other, or to all of us, are to be rewritten, and they must be like fully deconstructed and rewritten. Even like this, the way when I came to the US, the way people should, I mean, were speaking at that time in the 90s, and about like French feminism. Well, French feminism doesn't exist. You know what I mean? I mean, French
Yeah, and
feminism.
Wittig said that. She was like, I don't know what that means. Yeah, she considered herself a materialist.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And also what's interesting, and I was reminded of this at this panel on Wittig, that in The Straight Mind, she writes, and I have it up, lesbianism provides for the moment the only social form in which we can live freely. So this for the moment is really important, I think. And so I want to return to the earlier question and sort of lean into it more. And I apologize again that I got us derailed by the people that Sophie mentioned in her article that made me go on a doom scroll. But where would Wittig situate herself in queer studies today? And why is it that we're, and you all spoke about it a little bit, but why are we returning to Wittig in this moment? And what are the particular parts of Wittig that we can really lean into even more for a queer utopia?
Well, I know, it said, yeah, it was said prior to the call that we didn't want to get into like a big like identity politic thing. But I see that Alice is on is in the Zoom. Hi, Alice, and thank you for helping to bring this work back to us. But basically, when I was rereading the work, I just thought, oh my God, what a pioneer, like, I mean, gender abolition, you know what I mean, decades before, um and there's so many things, but so what was I getting ready to say? Uh
The
Fuck.
blurb?
I just had like a total brain freeze. So I thought, okay, she's this queer, theorist, pioneer, breaking all these boundaries. And then when I wrote in my blurb of her book that she was this queer pioneer and all this other stuff, it was said that I had to kind of like take that out. So yeah, that the estate wasn't comfortable with that. But then I was kind of like looking at her wiki pages and all of that, and everybody says queer, and then somebody she wrote like the lesbian body, you know what I mean? So what is that conflict?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe I can say something to that conflict, that I think is like, I think that there are like two levels to that conflict. I think that one is the very kind of almost ideological opposition between queer studies and materialist feminism, right? Like which are like basically like two different languages, two different ways of understanding gender, sexuality, sex, patriarchal power, heterosexuality. And the one is inspired, the materialist is inspired by Marxist readings. It's a kind of almost like political, economical a study of patriarchal ways of producing and reproducing society, and that understands that women are a class within the are like basically like us workers are a class within the production system. Women are a class within the reproduction system, and then from there they go into a whole like economic political analysis and so on, right? And then the materialists, but I guess that other people that are in the audience, they can come with us into this discussion. The materialists, they see queer studies as being unable to take seriously the economic and material dimension of oppression, right? So and they think that in a sense, like queer studies is capitalist, is basically is buying into the neoliberal lingo, and that they are much more radical. So that opposition, I think that this is one of the reasons also why Monique Wittig was not being read at a certain time, because basically the materialists were very jealous of the way that Monique Wittig could be read and should be read and quoted and so on, right? And I think that, but of course, when we say it in a general sense that Wittig is a kind of a queer writer, yes, he's a queer writer, like basically belonging to the queer, they say lesbian, homosexual, whatever culture that we want to call it, and that's in a general sense, right? But if we go into critical theory details, it will be like a critical theory group of materialists that will claim that Monique Wittig belongs to them as kind of this scholar, right? Which I personally do not subscribe to. I think that as we were saying before, Monique Wittig is humongous, monumental, universal, planetary, is like, and can be read in many, many, many different things, and we don't need to just like put Monique Wittig work in the straitjacket of the materialist reading, right? But that's one of the conflicts that if you read it like exactly in the context of a academic, for instance, like in academic readings, these debates will be endless, right? I don't know if they're very productive though, but they are endless. Yeah.
I think that Alice wants to speak to this, who worked on the book and who worked with the estate. Magley and Chloe, could we unmute Alice? There we go.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for doing it. I just wanted to sort of like respond to what Pamela was describing about basically having to cut someone's blurb short because the estate didn't agree with it. I mean, I think it's obvious to everyone that defining Monique Wittig as not queer is absurd. But I just wanted to speak. So together with Matvey Yankelevich, we worked on bringing this work into existence, and there was a lot of work regarding the language because we had, in fact, when the books were translated, Wittig did not choose a translator, and he was actually a doctor, a surgeon, so he had some good insights and a lot of shortcomings, and so Wittig actually annotated her own translations in English, proposing corrections for things that she didn't agree with, which were many. And so the work of Matvey and I was to sort of contend between the actual text, Wittig's in English, and the estate's decisions and will on what this text should look like. And especially this question of woman as a category that is not tethered to gender and like what lesbians can be, women or not, was at the center of our concerns as we were rethinking the text, because in the French, both the lesbian body and across the Acheron are dominated by the feminine personal pronoun as this sort of like gender neutral subject, which is very different from the écriture féminine that has been like done in like materialist French feminism. And so the problem is that when you translate a lot of things into English, you kind of lose them, or they become gender neutral in the way that we intended now, which was very different from the context in which Wittig was speaking and thinking. And so I think that in the text, all the kind of like instances of struggle of the translation between like féminin and like woman, or like elle, which is the singular, or elle with s plural personal pronoun in the feminine in French, when you turn them into English becomes like they, or one, or we, and so you lose that entire dimension. And I think that that is where Wittig's text is also incredibly interesting today as a materialist product, but also as a political program to push and think through language further. And so this is my personal view. I think that the estate wants to freeze the potential of this text. And it was, I apologize if we had to sort of like follow their quest at some point in order to put this book back into circulation.
Thank you.
Thank you
for that. And yeah, I mean, exactly. It's and it is, I do think that it's a slippery slope, and Paul, you so beautifully articulated these differences between materialist feminism and queer theory. But you know, like if it does enter academia, and for people to learn that Wittig's estate is you know, not aligning with the term queer, I just, yeah, I think that I do think that, again, that is a slippery slope. And so how do we navigate those conversations within academia and outside of it? So perhaps I know, Paul, you want to respond, and perhaps we can open it up to questions, and I have to run to teach. So thank you, everyone.
Bye, Ksenia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you, Ksenia. No, I didn't want to respond. I was very happy to listen to Alice, and thank you so much for the amazing publications of these books, because they are like, they need to circulate, and it's wonderful to have them available. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing on the books. And I totally agree. I think that here the question of language is so crucial for us. This is one of the things that for me is so important about Monique Wittig, that thinking that we are in a moment of epistemic transition, that we are probably like, you know, in spite of what is happening, in spite of fascism or all kinds of resistances that are happening, what is really also happening, and this is important for all of us to get to understand it, is that we are going through a major epistemic transition, and we will eventually transition from a binary regime into something else that will not be binary. And this is like, it's a threshold of history that has taken like mostly like 50, 70 years or something like that, but will happen at some point, and we're living through that. And that's why there are like so much political struggles, right? Because we have to somehow like stay there and push it forward. And I think that Wittig's work is crucial for that, because this is also a task of language. We're going to have to figure out with what language we're going to do this epistemic transition, right? So all these questions that Wittig was already asking in the 70s and early 80s are like even much more like burning and crucial for us now. So yeah, thank you so much for like having had the courage of like republishing these books. And I just want to say something about the stage, because I know Sandy very well, and I really love Sandy, and I think that and the fact that Sandy actually asked me to do the introduction, because when she asked me to do this introduction, I thought, she lost her mind. I mean, she's going to have all the materialists against her, like thinking, why do you ask a trans person and pull out of everyone to actually do this introduction, right? So I want to give a vote of trust for her, because I think that she's surrounded by many people that are like putting pressure on her and the way like Bitik should be read and all these things. But fundamentally, I think that she's very happy that the work is fully circulating and being reappropriated from many different cultures and many different levels. This will be the case now that the book is available, right? And the books are available. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was such a wonderful conversation to listen to. Before we turn to the Q&A, Ariana, I wanted to give you a chance to do your reading from The Lesbian Body, and then we can turn to the Q&A.
Oh, and can we hear from Pamela too?
Oh,
Pamela's
of course.
reading
We'll
too.
close out with
Oh,
Pamela.
you don't have to like volunteer me.
Sorry. Okay. Oh, wait, you're closing the show. You're closing the show.
Oh, okay.
Everyone has to stay in the Zoom room to hear Pamela close the show. So I'm just going to read to you all a little bit from The Lesbian Body so you can get a feel for it. And there are slashes in the first person singular um And so I'm going to read those slashes as a stutter. So we'll see how that goes. And it was very hard to choose what section to read. Um, it's like a content warning for everything. So gird your loins. I ha I have swallowed your arm. The weather is clear, the sea warm. The sun enters my eyes. Your fingers form a fan in my eye esophagus, then come together to thrust further. I struggle against vertigo. My eye optic nerves start under a very strong pressure. The shimmer of the light on the waves insults my eye entire body. I am penetrated endlessly by you. You thrust into me. You impale me. I begin an extremely slow journey. I am thronged by roarings. My eye ears lengthen. They beat furiously at the wood of the deck. They strike the sides of the boat. My eye tongue cut against my eye teeth is carried away as you descend me. My eye vocal cords stretched by the passage of your fingers transmit no sound. Cries propagate themselves within my eye arteries, incessant siren wailings, alarm signals. You do not stop. I perceive within flattened against my eye skin the organs ranged one beside the other, all distended. The green bile makes halos. The stomach hangs emptied of its acid. The liver resembles a stranded turbot. The spleen has burst, but you, my eye, so atrocious, intractable, implacable one, you still descend. I wait for you to perforate the membrane of my eye diaphragm. I wait for you to touch my eye pylorus. I wait for you to thread my eye duodenum on your hand. An enormous cry accumulates at the center around your arm. The pressure you exert on the sound waves finally makes me explode. I know it by heart, my eye tormentor, my eye most baleful one, my eye shadowy visage sparkling with black. The sea closes over me. Then I draw you down. I drag you down. I take you with me, foundering. It goes on and on.
Thank you so much, Ariana. That was
Ariana, this was the best reading that I heard of Monique Wittig. It's so difficult to read this text. Was so beautiful, amazing. Thank you so much. Wow.
Thank you. We'll turn to the Q&A now. The first question is from Saab. I'll give you a chance to unmute and ask.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists and the organizers for putting together this fantastic event. And also just Paul, what your comments earlier about the discursive battles that we endure as trans people were just really, really special to hear in a forum like this, and a conversation about like expansive genders and sexual and gender dissidents. So thank you for that. And hopping onto that, my question is actually for you. And I put trans studies in the one that I wrote, but I'm gonna re-articulate it a little bit. I learned about Wittig and many other sexual and gender dissident writers through your work, like Guillaume Destan. And this summer, some of his films were shown in the US for the first time in an exhibit with the drawings from Chloe Subdilo in sort of like a political project about public health and like trans and queer sort of like guerrilla social networks in a way. And I'm just really curious about how your relation, I found that really powerful because I think that especially in Nicolas Page's Guillaume is like a very trans character. Like he really writes like he's like a queen in so many ways, and he's still like a gay man, and he's really like sad on that, but he also explores gender in like a very expansive way. So I was thinking if you could talk a little bit about how your relationship with these corpus of our artists and thinkers and writers who wrote before contemporary articulations of transness have informed your writing in the contemporary moment, sort of like about transness and this like expansive conversations that we're having hemispherically and across the oceans and stuff and such. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the comments and the question. Well, maybe unfortunately the question, if I have to answer, would be like, would take like a whole new panel, and we would need like many other people that are not here today. And also, I have the feeling that it overflows a little bit, like the theme of the day, which is like Wittig's work. But maybe I'm going to try to answer that by replacing Wittig at the center of your question, because for many of us that kind of grew up in a culture where we didn't have there were like trans politics and trans references, but they were not fully let's say fully represented or fully discussed, both in academia or in the even in the not just cultural, but let alone like literary world, or even critical debates. I mean, those questions were not really there yet. They were not framed in such a way that the language was precise around what like trans practices could mean, right? And I think that now that if I, and also through your question, and thank you for the question, because I think that this maybe allow us to see almost like there are like figures for me that are almost like bridges between cultures, right? They're different things. There are people that are like bridge breakers, that's for sure. I mean, and those for me are not very interesting. When someone is like a bridge breaker, it means that basically like is closing the any possible path for connection to other cultures and other like retakes on what is happening. But I'm interested precisely on the bridges, on those figures that are like in between, not because they are in between female and male and all these stupid things that we usually say, not at all, but that are in between because that are already transitioning into something, that the work itself is transitioning, right? And I think that this is the case of Monique Wittig. It's not a question of Monique Wittig being trans. This is impossible because Monique Wittig was not trans. The trans culture didn't really exist. They didn't have access to, like maybe if she would have been in a culture like completely surrounded by testosterone as we were, I'm sure that maybe at some point she would have said like, okay, let's go for it, right? But that was not the case. So she was like fabricating her identity mostly with the language. And this is crucial for us to understand that language can be a technology of trans identity, right? But of a kind of a trans identity that is not about gender dysphoria, or even like medical transition as we imagine, but as something else. For instance, the fact that Monique Wittig was known by everyone as Theo en français, in French. I mean, this is like so obvious. When you met Wittig, no one would say Monique. This was so strange. Monique was her literary name, but you know, it's so funny because that is like her name as a writer, whereas basically her ordinary name was Theo, which was already a big statement, right? But for me, the question is not to make Monique Wittig into a trans author, or even to make. I mean, I could call. I mean, in the case of Guillaume Dustan, that is someone that I really knew much even more than Wittig, because it's from my generation. It was a really like dear friend of mine. I couldn't say that Dustan was trans, but nevertheless, Dostan was very critical of the way in which masculinity was constructed within gay culture. And this critique of masculinity was so strong that was transition, right? So for me, this question of transition is crucial. But that I can also see it. I mean, I'm seeing it because they're both in discussion with us today. Like Ariana's work and Pamela's work, for me, is a work in transition. As something is happening there that has to do with performativity, that has to do with language going somewhere else, taking us somewhere else, and producing this subject otherwise that is already transitioning. And that's why, for instance, the limits between poetry and essay, performance, theater, and even like reading or whatever. I mean, all these differences are like meaningless, are trouble from within, because this is about transitioning. And I think that in Pamela's work is even the same. Like basically, like what Pamela has done with the history of slavery has transformed radically the way we see history, right? So that is already like pushing us into a kind of transition, and that for me creates a whole new genealogy, which is not about identity politics. It's not about like saying like, okay, like let's see who is trans, who is like what are the lesbians? Okay, these are the lesbians. Well, these are the femme lesbians. These are the butch lesbians. They're like, you know, for me, all that I think that in 50 or 100 years, this is going to look like so crazy, because we are. I think that it should be very clear for us what is happening. I mean, we should be more together than ever, because what is happening in front of us is a very clear and determined gesture of eradicating the cultures that we've been constructing for the last 50, 100 years. So it's crucial that we stop like identity politics altogether, and we start like anti-fascist, trans, feminist, queer, like color alliances, like huge alliances, to be able to counter what is happening in front of us, right? Like beyond identity politics. So for me, these kind of genealogies of transition are more interesting than identity politics, right? Yeah.
I want to, can I jump in? I'm sorry. I know we're short on time, but I feel like I need to ask a grammatical question because I need to say something about adoration. So, so you heard the stutter in the first person singular, but the second person singular is not cut, or is not interrupted, and the third person is also not cut, whether it's singular or plural. But what I need to ask is in the French, because I haven't read this in French, is it the formal you or the familiar you?
Familiar is the familiar is tu. It's not.
Great. So
Yeah.
it's the you that you have made
Yes.
love with, that you have known,
Yes.
that you have fucked.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's important. I just want to say something about adoration, because there's something very fascinating that's operated in this text about the you, the familiar you, the you that you have made love with and to, that you have devoured and who has devoured you. There's something there's something else that my personal fatigue with identity has to do with having to think about me. And I think that one of the things that we could maybe use a tool for us to think about is like the position of the love poet, to take the position of the erotic poet who is so penetrated by the other that they're also dilated and expanding through that knowledge, right? Biblical knowledge. And I feel like there's something very, very important about the long tradition of erotic writing. And for some reason, the French specialize in that. I don't know why. Like, we won't essentialize around that, but like, I like we've lost love lately, so and instead of it being about me and protecting me, and I have to like defend all of the like precincts and the outer perimeters of the meanness of me, whatever, like there's something fascinating about what this work does around adoration, and how through adoration you can kind of overcome every form of destruction, and like there's an inevitable and incessant reconstitution and rebirth and expansion. It becomes very vitalizing, and it even cheers you up.
Yes. Love it. I love it. Totally agree with that.
I have some disagreements, but I'm not gonna say them.
No, say them.
No,
We love
not to your point.
disagreements.
But I mean, talking about like who gets to define like the wearing or the centering of identity and when we dispose of it. And I feel like those have to be in what is actually fighting fascism, because it's just sort of like I feel like my whole like my entire breath, my being and the fact that I survive here now is a fight against fascism, right? And so I don't necessarily need my identity stripped away for that to occur. So I take issue with people saying what we can do away with and what we can't. I mean, I feel like the freedom is choosing, and yeah,
Yeah,
and
just to
not
say,
having someone define that for us.
yes, I agree on that, Pamela, totally. I was not thinking about like stripping anyone of identity. On the contrary, but my
Mhm.
fear was rather like people trying to precisely define someone else's identity, over defining others' identity, and the way in which subaltern bodies in the history of modernity, we've been the object of a very violent and an oppressive definition of our identities, right? So it's not for me. I mean, yes, I'm not. Um, I'm referring very clearly to the way in which, for instance, like feminism is excluding now certain identities, or that being those that can be like trans identities, but can also be like Muslim identities, Latino identities, Black identities, whatever, right? So, I mean, I think that is the when I was speaking about identity politics, it's also a question of what are we going to spend the next years speaking about, and maybe and in order for us to be able to fight fascism, which I totally agree that if you have survived, if I have survived, we have survived. We've been already fighting fascism, but it's like fascism is taking basically a new form, and is taken in a new level of operation at the level of the nation state than before, maybe, right? And so we need to think collectively like new strategies of how are we going to do that, which doesn't mean that I'm not pretending to strip anyone from their identities, especially with when those identities are like have been the corner, like the what actually made you resist your destruction precisely, right? Like that's that you hold to that identity as holding to your history of survival, which is right, so which is so beautiful in your work. But yes, that's a long discussion anyway.
Thank you all so much for those answers. I wanted to double check that you all could stay a little bit past 2:30. We have two more questions, and I wanted to make time for Pamela's reading as well.
I have to say that I need to leave at 2:30, so I will not be able to stay longer than 2:30 because of my dog that is not doing so well, I have to say. Sorry about that.
I'll ask one more question and then we'll close up. The next question is from Liz. It's a question for Pamela. Liz asks, as someone who has written about slavery for much of their career, is there any degree to which you find Wittig's work analogy between women and slave troubling? I ask because my students and many people's presumption is that the comparison itself used by a white woman is anti-Black and feminists' use of the analogy is a failure, which somewhat speaks to Ariana's question of why these texts aren't being read.
Ooh, I mean, I think that that's a great question, and I think those are really valid points. I mean, I still want to unpack like who's we, you know, and like I mean, because we use that, pretty collectively, right? But is it? And when white people say we, I immediately shut down because I feel like it means them, right? Um, so I don't know. At the time that I encountered um her text, more than 30 years ago, um, it was eye-opening and it was liberatory language. And I still feel that way like in rereading her work. I mean, gender abolition. I'm like, I'm stuck with that. Like, 30, 40 years before, you know, people were really, talking about this. I mean, of course, there are other, philosophers and stuff like that. So I think sometimes it kind of like goes by the person. There's certainly like white feminists that I would critique, and I would say, please don't equate yourself as a slave, and don't because something becomes they're excluding us, or sort of like I didn't like The Handmaid's Tale because I feel like it sort of like adopts the language of like Black liberation, and but meanwhile sort of like erasing Black liberation. Does that make sense? Do people understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So I have a problem with that. So I mean, I guess would take their presence in my life and their work has been revolutionary and has given me, sort of has given me language. I don't feel that with a lot of people. So I'm going to say like case by case, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer, Pamela. And that concludes our Q&A portion. I will hand you back the mic to close us out with a reading, Pamela.
Okay. I might have to go off camera, but the space is devoid of ornamentation. The sand passes in fine, hard bleeds over the beaten surfaces. Manifesto, the one who calls herself my guide, walks ahead of me. Fortunately, we don't have to wear tunics for this journey, which is both sacred and profane, for they would be instantly torn off by the wind. Instead, the dress and gait of Manstabo, my guide, are somehow familiar. Her billowing shirt flaps around her chest and arms. The wind flattens her hair against her skull, revealing its shape. She has her hands in the pockets of her jeans and walks as if in a silent film. When she turns toward me, I can see from her lips that she is making a whistling sound, but I can't hear it. The sling of my rifle presses on the base of my neck and in the hollow of my shoulder blades. The course we are following does not allow me to determine whether we are taking a definite direction. The space is flat, flat enough to reveal the circulatory of the planet on the horizon. So no one seems to be walking at the exact middle of Earth. In fact, we are following the route which must be taken to arrive in hell, since it is there that Mastabo, my guide, says she is taking me. As the wind persists and quickens, we walk more slowly, leaning with every muscle against the expanse of air, only glad not to have our limbs torn off. I open my mouth to ask if we still have a long way to go. The blast rushes into it, preventing any sound. At last, facing the pace, forcing the pace, I manage to catch up with Manstable, my guide, and place an arm around her shoulders. Then we stop and look at each other face to face. Our features are distorted by the pressure of air, and as our lips curl back over our gums, they form no smile. What is she waiting for? Is she going to take me on her shoulders to get me to make the crossing? But what crossing? There's no river here. There's no sea.
Thank you so much, Pamela. What a beautiful way to close us out today. Thank you, Paul, Pamela, Ariana, Ksenia, and thank you to Matvey and Alice for their support in organizing this today. We'd
Thank
also
you.
thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSC program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with David Nolan and Valentina Branchini and William Corwin on the work and story of David Nolan Gallery. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Merci.
Thank you, Ariana.